So before we watch the film, I would just like to thank our co-presenters. The first one being Réseau québécois d'action pour la santé des femmes. Unfortunately, the representative couldn't be here today. And the second co-presenter is actually Jennifer Beeman, who's, as I introduced her earlier, the director of Breast Cancer Action Quebec, and she's going to say a few words about the film. And then you'll find her again after the film in the panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Jennifer Beeman from Breast Cancer Action Quebec, and we are so pleased to be with Cinéma Politica and le Réseau québécois d'action pour la santé des femmes to present this film. Breast Cancer Action Quebec is a feminist environmental health organization dedicated to the prevention of breast cancer. And this is the beginning of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and there is nothing better that we could do than to show this film. This is the heart of our work for 27 years, and the questions raised you'll see are just profoundly important and not well understood by the general public. And so I would really encourage you to stay for the panel. I think you're going to have a lot of questions, and we have good people to answer them. And the timing is really important because we have an opportunity to change the legislation with this election. And so that is what even more important that we talk about this and what we need to do to change the situation. So I really hope you'll stay. I really am looking forward to the panel. And I won't say enjoy the film, but let's be enriched together by the film. So, thank you.
Jennifer Beeman is a sociologist. She has worked for many years with or in social movements, particularly with women's groups on women's rights at work, including pay equity, work-family balance, women's access to predominantly male trades, and women in construction. 5 years ago, she returned to her first interest in the women's movement, women's health and environmental health. At Breast Cancer Action Quebec, in addition to acting as director, she has developed several important programs, including breast cancer and immigrant and racialized women, overdiagnosis and overtreatment of breast cancer, an environmental health and toxic substances program for public high schools, and the reform of the Canadian Environment Protection Act, among others. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer Beeman.
Okay, thank you for staying, because as you saw, the film has a lot to say, and I think we're going to really want to talk about it, and I am really excited about the people we have to talk about it with. And so first, we have Ariane Metellus. And Ariane, I'm so happy you're here. Ariane is a social entrepreneur, and she's passionate about relationships involving care, women's health, and perinatal care. She's a birth coach, consultant, and activist who has the privilege of working directly with women and with organizations who share the same interests. She's a board member of the Regroupement Naissance Respectée and Vivre Sans Fibrome, in addition to being on the Pan-Canadian Research Advisory Committee of the Respect Study, research examining the stories of pregnancy and childbearing in Canada today, as well as many other kinds of activism, and just always working on women's health activism. Her career focuses on the importance of pregnancy, childbirth, and the health experiences of more marginalized women, particularly Black women and women of diverse origins in Quebec. And as she says, everything she does in her work is rooted in love always. So thank you, Ariane. And with us, as well, we have Bélinda Corbeddu, who works in the laboratory with Isabelle Plante, who was in the film. So Bélinda is a doctoral student in toxicology at the Institut National de Recherche Scientifique, Centre Armand Frappier, in health and biotechnology. She has a master's degree in toxicology, environment, and health from the University of Paris, where she subsequently worked as a research assistant. She chose to come to Canada for her doctorate and is doing research with Professor Isabelle Plante's laboratory. The lab focuses on the toxicity of environmental pollutants on breast health. For Bélinda's work, she focuses on the effect of plasticizers and specifically phthalates on breast development and breast cancer formation. She and I have already presented together. We did a joint presentation on breast cancer and plastics, and it was really good. And it was for the Institut Santé et Société, and you can see it on the YouTube channel of the ISS. Obviously, Bélinda can answer lots of questions on toxicology. Ariane, questions on what this means for women. But I'd first like to ask them just to take 1 minute of your first reactions of what we saw, because that was a lot. So, Ariane, do you want to go first?
Do you want to come here? I'm over here. Hi, thank you for having me. Well, I have a lot of first impressions about the documentary. One that really struck me is the lack of Black women or people of color on decision-making tables, or even in the room. One of the professors or at the university, when you saw, even if she was a woman of color, but in the audience, there were not much people of color, which for me is really problematic. And what else? The other thing was how easy it was for all these men to lie. Like, just to lie to our faces, but just to lie. And at the end, the chairman of J&J, how easy it was for him to say that it's no problem, we're safe, it's a concern for us, it's dear to their hearts. Like, it's so hypocritical. So that was but I will have a lot to say about it later, but yeah, those are the two main things.
Bélinda, on.
Yeah, for me, I was just impressed about all the work that they do in the documentary, but I was also shocked about, like, they didn't listen about scientists. Like, there are a lot of studies that show that talc and everything was dangerous, and people don't care, industry don't care, government don't care. So it's really frustrating, and it's frustrating for all my day at work. Like, I work a lot on phthalate and breast cancer, and what is the end of that? So if no one listens, so it's my frustration here.
I first got involved in the women's health movement in the 1980s, and that's when this was coming out. I knew about this in the 80s. And then I had children in the early 90s, and what they didn't mention is how dangerous it is for lungs. And there are warning labels for children on baby powder. It says, keep out of reach of children. And the reason you have to keep it out of reach of children is because if they inhale it, it's extremely dangerous. And I knew about that too. And I thought in the 90s that it had been banned. I was like, and that they had moved on to cornstarch. And then these law cases started coming up. I was like, what? What? Wait, what happened? We know that this should have been banned in the 1980s, and it's that. The science wasn't listened to, and you are spot on in when you look around and there are no people of color, and it's men lying to us, to our faces. And so I would take that as a starting point, and now I'm sure you have questions, and I think we should just open it right up to your questions and comments.
Well, before coming here, I was about to pick up my makeup, and then I had maybe not. And then I was, I'm not too sure about that. So, yes, but the funny thing is I'm not somebody who wears a lot of makeup, but lately in the last couple of months, I was like, maybe I should put a little something on, and I invested in some makeup, and then I kind of regretted it because I know how harmful it is, but when I went to buy the makeup, I was in a hurry, so I didn't think about the alternatives. So it's really weird. And this weekend I was in Montreal, and on Friday night I realized I didn't bring my cream, my body lotion. So I went to the pharmacy and I bought whatever was there without thinking about it. And last night I got home and my whole body was itching. And I didn't understand why. And then I took the cream and I was like, yep, I haven't put any commercial creams in a couple of years. And I realized that I was starting to, to react to the product. And I also, and it's funny because I didn't know I was gonna come here. Like I got to know like a week ago or 10 days ago. And in the past couple of weeks or months, I have been using, my husband bought like soap, commercial soap, toothpaste, and I've been so tired, but I couldn't understand why. And this morning and yesterday, while I was getting ready for this presentation tonight, I flashed and I was like, oh my God. I started using again some of the products I had stopped using in a long, long time. And pads, like commercial pads, hygiene pads, and things like that. So very relevant, very relevant. That's my little anecdote.
They appear that when they put medical in the market, they don't know the consequence because they study for just end this disease. They just health really, I lose my word, like to save this person with this problem. But the problem is that they don't look at long-term consequences of this medical. And the other problem is that we are exposed to a lot of compounds, a lot of endocrine disruptor, like we see today in the cosmetic, but we have that in everything, in your plastic bottle, in your lunch plastic thing and everything. So we are exposed to a lot of compound every time. So it's really, really difficult to understand which compound can lead to one disease. So it's why it's really hard. It's why we saw that for the lower from G&G, like they say, oh, there are no directly proof, like it's induced ovarian cancer, because it's too hard to prove by my side.
Right, exactly. It's very, very hard to prove exact causal relationship. Yes, do you have a... It is very, very hard for consumers to know which, in the long list of ingredients, what is toxic, what you have to look out for. And this drives me up the wall. And so I'm going to take a minute just to talk about regulations, okay? Because we really need to understand the regulatory system. A little bit of history, 30 seconds of history and a minute of regulations. History. After World War II saw the expansion of the chemical industry like nothing before. At the end of World War II, those chemicals, manufacturers are looking where to, that was a huge boom. What are they going to do? It goes into consumer products across the line, whether it's personal care products, furniture, flooring, and it's also a revolution in terms of the molecules we can create. So it explodes. And there's no regulatory system while it's being used, while this is developing. Things advance, and in the 1980s, the first regulatory systems to just classify this stuff is going into place, even though science has been coming out since the 50s that we have a problem. The regulatory system for cosmetics in Canada, it's the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that determines what is legally toxic. And that plays out in the cosmetics regulation, but there's very little control over what is used in cosmetics before it goes on the market, before it goes into the marketplace. So, I know this, but I was double checking and triple checking. Health Canada has to be informed within 10 days of a product going on to the market of what that the fact that that product is being sold and what the ingredients of that product are. So all of these products, they can be sold before Health Canada is even informed that they're for sale, much less what are the ingredients. That's the state of our regulatory system. There's a woman who briefly appears, is really important. She's the Commissioner for the Environment for Canada, and she's part of the Auditor General's federal department. And she says we have a post-regulatory chemical regulation here, a post-market chemical regulation. Post-market chemical regulation. It goes on to the market. Then people like Bélinda going, wait, putting together the research going, this stuff is terrible, here are all the health effects, and then we try to retroactively get it back, get warnings in place, get the word out, and we have a major problem. And so that's why other people are saying, this is as big as climate change. Climate change is humongous, but this is big. This is really big, and we need to talk about it. 30 more seconds. Now is the time to talk about it because we have a political window of opportunity to reform the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. There's a really good reform on the table. In this next mandate, whoever comes in, we need to, you tell your new deputies, everybody has to say loud and clear, we want a reform of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. If you don't know anything about it, sign up for our mailing list. It's free. We'll send you information and you will get informed on this stuff. That's the end of my speech. Ariane, do you want to? Oh, I sent Ariane lots of articles, and I felt bad about the burden that I was placing on her to take on the profound environmental injustices and injustices around beauty with this. And how did you do with all of that? How did you feel?
Well, I think it's a very important topic. We have to talk about it. It's an issue. It's a fact. So yeah. Yes, it's a burden, but it's not a burden. It's a
it's really unjust. Johnson & Johnson, when their sales dropped among white women in the 1980s, yes, deliberately had a campaign aimed at targeting African American women
and plus size women.
And plus size women.
Yes,
it was really, really jaw-droppingly. To say it's unethical, you just go, who thinks of these things? There's more questions. I checked, and I'm not entirely sure that warning is up. Health Canada, when all these lawsuits were coming up, really, for the past 2 years, Health Canada initiated another assessment of talcum powder. And they are they haven't come up with a finalized recommendation. So I'm not sure. In December 5th of 2018, they said, here's some of the things that we are thinking about doing, and one of them is putting on a warning label. At this point, I checked the cosmetics ingredient hot list, and talcum powder is a restricted item, and as of now, the only warning is regarding keep out of reach of children. That's the only official warning and so I think they jumped the gun a little bit on there at the end of the movie.
Yeah, it's a really tough question. Like, we know that different compounds can act differently in the body. Like plasticizer, the phthalate family, can leave the body. So we know that after a few hours or days, they will leave. Some compounds are lipophilic and will stay in the fat tissue, so it will stay longer. The problem is that for cosmetic compounds, we use it every day. So it's a chronic exposure. So as she said, that we have a chronic exposure, so constant concentration in our body. So it could impact the body, like if we are exposed at adulthood, and we could develop cancer at long term. It's a problem, it's a fact. But another problem, it's like she talked about sensitivity windows, like during pregnancy and lactation, and during in utero exposure and pregnancy for the woman. So it could affect the baby, but don't see the damage at birth. But the baby could develop cancer at long term. So it's a big part of the research now, like the 15 years ago, 20 years ago, like to understand the problem of the endocrine disruptor. It's like, it's a new thing, but it's not a new thing. We know about that and we look about that. And we know now that it could have damage effects for descendants. So if you are exposed now, if like I'm pregnant now, my babies, if it's a woman, will have the ovary exposed, so the baby of my baby could develop something. So we know that it's a problem. And it's bigger because I'm exposed a lot of compound. So it's hard to don't be paranoid. We have to live, to stay, to live, and to continue to loot about that and find a solution.
But one thing I find fascinating, for a better word, but is when they say that a product is, they put a warning that pregnant women and lactating women can't use certain products. How is it logical? Because the damage has already been, I think, done if the woman was exposed even before she was pregnant, or in the first weeks because she didn't know she was pregnant. So, well, maybe for Jennifer or for you, but what's the exposure risk before, right before, or just when the baby was born, or no, not born, but conceived? And, well, with the regulations, how could that change? Because basically, you know, you're thinking of conceiving, you should not use this product. You're pregnant, you should not. But like there's...
You're absolutely right. The incoherence is profound, and there is the only answer to that is proper regulation, so we're not exposed long time before it's a danger period. You're absolutely right. Educating pregnant women that they shouldn't be using this or that, well, if someone finds out when they're 8 months pregnant, it's like, whoops, could have used that a while ago. But there's now transgenerational effects. And
yeah,
so.
And because, like, as you ask if it's also dangerous to be exposed before, it's new. It's the study actually that we try to understand which moment it's the key that could like turn and do damage after. The problem is that if in regulation we can't say, okay, if you want to be pregnant, stop to using this product 1 year before. We can't. So the normal thing, the logical thing, is that if a compound could be dangerous during pregnancy, just stop, put it in market.
Okay, so we have a question here, and then here. I can't speak to governing bodies internationally at all, and I'm sorry. These companies, and it's a very important question, because these companies operate worldwide, but they don't necessarily use the same ingredients in the same jurisdiction. And so it's well known that in the European Union, where that they have a different regulatory system that's much more severe, and you actually have to publish the ingredients before it goes on the market and prove that, to a certain extent, demonstrate that it doesn't have known harms. That L'Oreal will use different ingredients than it will in North America, and there are women traveling in Europe who'll stock up on the European products, and so I really don't know how that plays out in other countries. One of the things that we learned is that countries that have very low levels of low rates of breast cancer, and there are some. It's complicated comparing between countries, but there are countries that do have quite low rates of breast cancer. The women who emigrate here, within 10 years of their living in Canada, their risk increases to the same level as Canadian-born women. And it was actually Isabelle Plante, who was one of the people who alerted us to this, who thinks that it's a strong indication that we really have to be paying attention to our environment, because diets don't change that much. People are quite active, and that what really one of the things that changes rather profoundly is what you're exposed to in your everyday life. But your points are certainly well taken.
And what I realized too is, you know, with the lightening skin products and for a lot of Afro-American women or Afro-descent women, they use less and less, hopefully, but they use the straightening perm that's been linked to fibroids and reproductive health issues. And I was telling to myself, because there's this big issue with like representation in ads and marketing, and then you have that problem of toxicity in personal care products and beauty products. And now I realize that the more we're getting informed and educated about the toxicity of certain products, the more those companies are going to take in, let's say Viola Davis just became the face of L'Oréal Paris, right? So now we're more informed, but then they're pushing the black women, the most popular black women in the United States right now, and they're pushing her in the forefront. So obviously it's gonna cause other problems in terms of who's gonna buy these products more. So it's a never-ending vicious circle.
Yeah, but I also will add about Color People product for hair and for lightening and everything. I was looking today to prepare my presentation today for a state of evidence, and they say three I don't know the word. No. I don't know, more vulnerable people. It's like the child, the pregnant person, and the color people, because of in the screen, in the hair dryer, everything. There are a lot of estrogen-like products. Placenta also, I didn't know, and so everything it's more exposure, and we know that estrogen-like compound could lead to breast cancer and ovarian cancer. So.
Individuals are never responsible for their health problems. I don't care if you, no, you just don't blame the people, because it's anti-health to start blaming people for what they present with, and that's really, really important to us.
I think for changing the regulation, it's part of the mass of the people that are hungry. Stop to put all the stuff in my products. Stop to expose my children. Do something. And scientists, we try to do that. We put our article, but they don't care. And last time with Jennifer, we were in the Grand Débat from a group of toxicology in Montreal, and the people from Health Canada say, okay, but the things when we choose, we look to your paper, we talk to the industry, but we also look to what think the people. And I think if people are angry, it changes everything, because they need to be re-elected. And it's sad, but it's true.
I don't know. In Pink Ribbons Inc., the Quebec director of the film does it. No, she has to send it to California. I don't know. And I don't know how you'd find out either where that's done. I guess just to wrap up, I just have to reiterate the extent to which I so agree with Bélinda, with everything. We have to make our voices heard. I've been to stakeholder meetings in Ottawa around chemical management plan, and it's where these things are talked out in front of the regulators, and you can't believe how strong the representation of corporations are around the table. They're represented individually. Suncor sits there as its own belt, as itself, but also the Association of Canadian Petroleum Producers, manufacturers, Canadian Chemical Association, huge delegations, and then there's these little tiny groups, little tiny health groups, and some slightly bigger environmental groups. Maybe about a quarter of the group is from health and environment, and 3/4 easily from major corporations. They need the resistance, and the lobbying happens at every level. It happens as much to Health Canada as to our MPs and elected officials. And so they need to hear that Canadians are really mad about this, and that we really want a better regulatory system, that is not doing its job. So please, so you can get involved, ask questions of candidates, and stay informed, and make your voice heard, because otherwise it's not going to change.
Can I say something?
Please say something.
Well, again, thank you for organizing this viewing. And I just want to take a moment to say that we're getting educated tonight, right? But for me, it's a privilege that we have, that we're being educated and that we're having this conversation. And not everybody has that privilege, right? And I think the work you do at Action Cancer du Sein Québec, le regroupement Naissance Respectée, the work that we all do is very important. But I want to remind people that we have to keep reaching out to those marginalized communities, because at the end of the day, who's paying and who's going to be left behind are these marginalized communities. So yes, it's a privilege. Yes, I'm very happy to be here, but I need to see more outreach and more people of color, marginalized women, like being informed and educated about these issues. Excellent. So yeah.
I don't know if you want the last word, but thank you. That's a perfect last word. Thank you, Ariane. Thank you, Bélinda. Thank you all for coming.